And I think, Pete, the voters deserve 99.99% of the credit for that, because this was the conversation. And frankly, as the election came and rounded the final corner, there was the tragic assault of Speaker Pelosi's husband, Paul Pelosi, and voters got to see what was, again, being flirted with on the right and embraced in some dark corners, and that is the specter of political violence, and they rejected that as well. So I take Brandon's point that in these elections, democracy was on the ballot. We made it part of the conversation. The four of us talked about it frequently at many turns over the last 2 years, and voters said, yeah, I want to continue to live in a democracy. But that goes to the political weakness, I guess, of Trump, who's not such a fan of those rules and those norms and those traditions. What do you make of his reentry into presidential politics?
Well, Nicole, I think we're going to have about 2 years to find out. The reality is a lot, if not all, of the national security concerns that existed around Trump were not resolved. They're still there today. You know, the Saudis gave his son-in-law $2 billion. He continues to have potentially huge financial troubles with the debt that he's carrying, coupled with the, the lawsuits that are going on against his financial interests. And from an international perspective, I mean, just not long ago, President Biden gave a speech where he was talking right after he was elected. I think it was the G7 that he went to, and he sought to reassure our allies and said, hey, look, we're back. And he said immediately, one of our closest allies asked him, said, OK, but for how long? And so I think the reality is people are still around the world looking to the United States and trying to figure out, is this flirtation with Trump done? Is Trump not only the individual sort of national security problems he had, are there also problems that his mistrust of the NATO alliance, his, coziness with people like Vladimir Putin, his hesitation to support Ukraine, all the things that from a strategic perspective Russia would want to pursue, Trump very much aligns with those. So I think time will tell, and I think we're going to have to keep a close eye to the tens of millions of people who still support former President Trump to see what that translates to in the 2 years ahead.
Right, to see what they've become conditioned to under his messaging. Mary, Jonathan Karl of ABC News and the author of the great book Betrayal reported on this program that he had sources very close to Trump who acknowledged that Trump announced his run for the purpose of making it more uncomfortable and difficult for DOJ to investigate and, if they deem necessary, charge him in the Mar-a-Lago investigation or anything related to January 6th. What will the result of that be inside DOJ?
Well, I don't know if that's what Trump had in mind or not, but I don't think it's going to be successful. DOJ, I know there's been reporting, has been considering whether maybe this should cause it to appoint a special counsel, much like Mueller was appointed as a special counsel. His candidacy would give, if they were launching an investigation after Trump had already announced his candidacy, I think that's something that they would really seriously need to consider so that they could avoid any perception of a political investigation. But the fact is, this investigation, and particularly the Mar-a-Lago investigation, but others, all the others you mentioned at the top of the hour, started long before he had announced his candidacy. And so I think at this point, to think about something like a special counsel, I think there's a lot of reasons against that, where they're so far along in the investigation, and it would delay things, and it would be used also by Trump to further delay things. If there is eventually going to be an indictment. The other point I would make is that to the extent he thinks that, if I'm elected into office, I am beyond the ability to be prosecuted, that's not at all the case. Certainly there's no bar on state prosecutions, such as the one that's being investigated in Georgia. And even that Office of Legal Counsel memo that, governed Special Counsel Mueller in the Russia investigation, and that's been kind of on the books for a number of years, that memo that says it would be wrong to indict a sitting president, even that is just an Office of Legal Counsel memo. I think it is a very open and debatable constitutional question whether the Department of Justice could indict and prosecute a sitting president. It might be that the answer lies in you can indict, but you don't prosecute until after they're no longer president. There's a variety of ways to look at it. But to be clear, that OLC memo is just a memo. It is binding on the Department of Justice, but of course it can be changed with a new opinion from the Office of Legal Counsel, and it's not binding on courts, and it's not, no court has ruled on the constitutionality of that. So it may be what Trump has in mind, but I don't expect it to stop any of the investigations, and I don't expect it to stop any indictments if they are going to be forthcoming.
So then, Mary, let me ask it a little more specifically. It's only a memo, but it was a memo that was at the center of the Mueller team's calculations and decisions. It's the attempt to articulate something that was really hard for most people to understand in Volume 2. And I think Robert Mueller himself tried to say, if I could say he hadn't broken a law, I would. It all became riddle-like. And so I guess my more pointed question is, it's just a memo. Is it just a memo that Merrick Garland is likely to ignore?
No, not at all, because that memo, while it exists, it is binding on the department. But the point is, OLC sometimes does change its view, and sometimes there are new memos written, and OLC could re-examine the question. It could come out with a different result. Now, that would have its own problems, right? Because then that would be looked at as political. And so I'm not saying that I expect that to happen. I'm just saying that it is not the case that any court has ever ruled that as a matter of constitutional law, it is, you cannot indict a sitting president. And so, I just think that should be clear, because people tend to look at that OLC memo as sort of like, established doctrine, and it is certainly possible it could be revisited. That, again, would carry its own consequences, and I think there's reason for the department to be moving more quickly so that this doesn't become an issue, and if they're going to act before the election in 2024.
Brandon, what is the piece that we can't see from the outside? You've all operated at the highest levels of the Justice Department. You've all been in and around and a part of and breathing the same air as people who were in the ex-president's crosshairs and involved in the last efforts by the Justice Department to investigate potential national security issues pertaining to him and the people around him. What is the actual intangible effect of him being a declared candidate as opposed to who he was yesterday at this hour?
I don't think it has. I completely agree with Mary. I don't think it has any impact whatsoever. I think this case, in terms of how it's been staffed, in terms of its oversight, has gone forward with the assumption and belief that they are investigating the political rival of the president of the United States. And you have evidence of that from the fact that the attorney general reviewed and approved the search warrant. That rarely happens. I'm guessing that you can count on one hand for each attorney general how many times they have read a search warrant while attorney general. And so that's already been built into it. And this announcement really just solidified, confirmed what had already been assumed. And so if anything, what it does, and Mary made this point, which I agree with, is it does confirm that there needs to be an accelerated time frame for this investigation. So what they're doing right now at the department is moving with all deliberate speed, as much haste as possible to wrap this investigation up so that they can make a charging decision.